Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Puneet, and in this video we will talk about Bruce Lee's life and martial arts philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. Dissect my favorite Bruce Lee quote, as this has had the most profound effect on my own process of self-discovery, mindful approach to productivity and creativity, which this channel is all about. Full playlist on the topic linked above. I will also take you on a tour of the Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, where Bruce Lee and his son Brandon Lee are buried. Timestamps are in the description below, so if you'd like to jump to that section, feel free. Visiting the cemetery was a surreal experience for me because as a kid I owned VHS tapes of most of his movies, Enter the Dragon, Big Boss, Game of Death, and Fist of Fury. Just saying these names makes me feel like a kid again. Let's begin. For those of you who don't know much about Bruce Lee, he was a famous martial artist, Hollywood actor who died really young at the age of 32, about 40 years ago in 1973, 3 years before I was even born. But the newer generations are discovering his philosophy through his quotes and pictures. So Bruce Lee says in his most famous quote, "Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." I read his daughter's book, Be Water, My Friend, The Teachings of Bruce Lee by Shannon Lee to understand his philosophy at a deeper level. Let's dissect this quote piecemeal. First, when he says, empty your mind, he is talking about the constant inner dialogue that we all have, which keeps our minds busy. This idea is very similar to a quote from Seneca, a Stoic philosopher who said that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. What Bruce Lee is saying here is when we move to a more open state, move clutter off to the side, become neutral, we become available to receive in a non-judgmental way. Now this emptiness isn't a negative thing like one would think, as Shannon Lee explains in the book. Emptiness is a state of openness and neutrality that allows you to consider a new point of view that's unclouded by your belief, judgments, or preferences. Without being open to the possibility of what there is to discover, we'll never expand our knowledge and our growth will be stunted and slowed, she writes. An empty vessel can accept anything it wants to receive. This neutrality creates a heightened awareness and is a high energy state where we are hyper-present, not passively judging others, which might limit our experience of life, and are super open. All of this for just the 3 words of the quote. Water is used in this quote as a metaphor for life. Life is a process, a non-stop activity. Life is like a river, just flowing. Life doesn't get stale. Like water, it keeps flowing. Flow around the obstacles like water if stuck. Here's a story from Bruce Lee's life. Bruce Lee's famous show The Green Hornet and his character the Kato got cancelled and he had a tough time getting Hollywood roles. He was told that a Chinese man as a lead in America would not work with the audiences. Basically that he can't be a Hollywood star. So he went to Hong Kong where he was a child movie star and he was seen as someone who had made it big in Hollywood when he hadn't at the time. He made some movies which were blockbuster hits and then came back to Hollywood. Just like when you strike or punch water, it moves out of the way. This idea can be applied to life's obstacles. Another aha moment from his life was when his Kung Fu teacher, Yip Man, made famous as the Ip Man in Hollywood movies, asked him to leave and embark on a process of self-discovery. An angry and disappointed Bruce Lee was on a boat in the Hong Kong harbor, one hand hanging from the side of the boat. He smacked the water hard in frustration. Water moved out of the way. It slipped smoothly between his fingers when he tried to grasp it. In this moment, he understood this idea. You can't hurt water as it is soft, but it can be very powerful when it is in the hurricane state. You get the idea. The focus of this philosophy is in its suppleness, pliability. If you cannot be pliable in your thinking or your response to a situation, then you have limited options for success, for growth, and for joy, Shannon Lee writes in the book. In the modern age, there is a fixation on tech, data, and the habits obsession, mimicking habits of successful people which might lead to rigid thinking. People get petrified of just being themselves. The idea here is to believe in yourself, finding your personal flow, and in this process, not mimicking anyone, as it is not an authentic state of being. Any idea you embrace should first resonate with your inner self. Always be in a state of self-discovery and being aware of yourself. Go with your own instincts. This is exactly the opposite idea to life hacking. Ultimately, we learn best when we understand ourselves, experiment, fail, and then ultimately succeed. Living your life can be a lonely place when forging your own path. One needs to strike a fine balance when seeking outside validation. If your cup is full, there is no more room for ideas and thoughts. Lee believes everyone should liberate themselves and leave behind the burdens of one's preconceived opinions and conclusions. In other words, empty your cup. Continue to empty the cup periodically to make space for newer things. Be present. Have a burning desire to figure things out. Peace of mind comes from within, not without. Quiet yourself. Only once you have emptied your mind can you listen to your heart. Finally, the quote ends with "my friend." These two words embody his teaching philosophy. Being inclusive with his students, believing that a teacher's job is to be a mirror, to show their students who they truly are. He cared about his students, even outside the class, passionately dedicated to his art form, but also using it to lift people up. My friend, the phrase, builds an emotional connection. It's okay if we're struggling, we're all in this together. Every day, try to get down to the essence of yourself. Bruce Lee had a human-first policy. Shannon Lee writes, and I quote, "It would be so helpful to focus on treating one another with a certain amount of care, compassion, and respect, and get away from judgmental thinking. We're all equals, one family. All these differences we have are outward embellishments, but we're all the same internally." As I was reading Bruce Lee's Wikipedia page, I found out that he was also the Cha-Cha dance champion of Hong Kong, which helped his feet movement in his martial art practice. Nothing we ever learn ever goes waste. Life has its own unique way of connecting diverse interests, so one should always be learning, always moving, always improving. Bruce Lee said the meaning of life is that it is to be lived. What he means by this is that life is meant to be engaged with, present in, taking action towards. It is not to be conceptualized or only thought about. When you're stuck, move through the world, cultivate life, cultivate yourself as a human being. What is your process, your inquiry? If you're stuck, find your path and flow around it. If pushing hard isn't working, be soft. Be yourself. Even if it is the scariest thing. That is the center point of his philosophy. Discovering yourself is the journey of any artist. It is scary to be alone with yourself and not have another tried and tested personality to wear as a cloak. I really resonated with Bruce Lee's ideas of using his movies, and in my case, this YouTube channel, a way of showing your culture, your individuality in an authentic way, defining and living your own idea of success. Bruce Lee was raised in Hong Kong. Lee arrived in Seattle to finish his high school. His family sent him to the Pacific Northwest so he could stay safe from too much street fighting. In 1961, he enrolled at the University of Washington, where I work as a professor of radiology, and took drama and philosophy classes for 3 years. He worked his way through UW as a waiter at Ruby Chow's International District restaurant, and by giving gung fu lessons anywhere he could. He is buried at the Lakeview Cemetery in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. I went there early morning to beat the crowds and share some moments of solitude with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee's and Brandon Lee's graves have been gated, and it was a surreal experience for me to visit and pay my respects. I also drive by the church where he got married every morning on my commute. Here are some other Bruce Lee facts. In 1962, Bruce Lee landed 15 punches, a kick, and knocked out an opponent in a fight that lasted only 11 seconds. Lee's speed in terms of reacting and punching from a distance of 3 feet was 500ths of a second. His kicks were so fast that while filming a scene in Enter the Dragon, they had to refilm the scene in slow motion so that it would not appear fake. One of the most famous fighting moves that are associated with Lee was the use of the 1-inch punch. There was one instance where a man was driven 16 feet after being knocked back by it. The 1-inch punch has been measured at 153 pounds of force, about 2 times more injurious than a car traveling at 30 miles per hour. All this made possible by his ability to be in the moment. Here are a few of my other favorite Bruce Lee quotes I leave you with. I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. To hell with circumstances, I create opportunities. When you say something is impossible, you have made it impossible. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. Do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one. Be happy, but never satisfied. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. Take the time to explore other productivity videos on the channel. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next video.